A jagged bolt of lightning fractured the midnight sky over the Tsushima Strait, illuminating a scene of absolute terror. Heavy winds screamed across the water, driving the Mongols' massive armada helplessly toward the jagged rock formations of the Kyushu coast. In the intermittent blackness, the flat-bottom invasion hulls were tossed like toys, violently smashing against one another and splintering directly into the sheer cliff walls as thousands of soldiers were thrown into the churning pitch-black sea. Hello, and welcome to Impactful Moments, where we explore some of the most, you guessed it, impactful moments in human history. In this video, we'll discuss the Mongol invasions of Japan and the Japanese miraculous fight for survival. The year is 1192, and the map of East Asia was about to change immeasurably. On the islands of Japan, the fallout of the bloody Genpei War saw the Minamoto clan strip the imperial court of its practical authority. They established a new militarized administrative capital in Kamakura, introducing the world to a governance structure ruled by the sword, the shogunate. 14 years later, and roughly 2,000 miles west, a parallel consolidation of power occurred on the Eurasian steppe. In 1206, a brutal tribal power struggle ended with a warrior named Temujin being christened as Chinggis Khan. Over the next decades, his Mongol Empire executed the most rapid territorial expansion in human history, stretching a single contiguous land empire from the Pacific Ocean to the borders of Central Europe. While the Mongol war machine expanded outward, the Japanese political experiment mutated inward. Just as the emperor had been reduced to a cultural figurehead by the shogun, the shogunate itself was soon hijacked. Following the death of the first shogun, the Hojo clan seized operational control of the government, ruling through proxy positions known as the shiken, or regents. Japan was now a military state operating under the government of regents, ruling through a puppet shogun who answered to a nominal emperor. Stable, I know. Back on the mainland, following the death of the great Han Manke in 1259, the monolithic Mongol Empire fractured into 4 khanates. The wealthiest and most populous slice fell to Chinggis Khan's grandson, Kublai Khan, who established the Yuan dynasty with a primary objective: conquer the wealthy southern Song dynasty and unify China. But the Song dynasty maintained a highly active maritime trade network with the Hojo regents in Japan, making the archipelago a prime economic and trade partner to Kublai's primary rival. That connection had to be severed. To do this, Kublai turned to his newly subjugated vassals, the Goryeo dynasty in Korea, leveraging their maritime infrastructure to construct a massive fleet. Before any attack, however, he decided to test the political waters. In 1268, a first wave of Mongol envoys stood before the Chinzei Bugyo, the shogunate's defense commissioner of the West, stationed in Kyushu. Much like the ultimatums delivered to the continental empires, the emissaries presented a veneer of diplomacy wrapped around a mandatory demand for tribute. The defense commissioner forwarded the letter up the chain of command to Kamakura, eventually reaching Hojo Tokimune, the newly appointed regent. Just 17 or 18 years old and facing the most formidable decision of his young career, Tokimune made a terrifyingly bold decision, or lack thereof. While the imperial court in Kyoto drafted a conciliatory reply, Tokimune overrode them, completely ignored the emissaries, and refused to grace the great Han with the dignity of an answer, sending the Mongol envoy back across the Tsushima Strait empty-handed. As one might imagine, being ghosted by a small island nation did not sit particularly well with the Han. By 1273, following several more fruitless requests for diplomacy, Kublai Khan wrote the possibility of relations off as dead, and began mobilizing the newly constructed shipyards, assembling a massive amphibious invasion force to do what the Mongols did best: conquer. In November 1274, the first invasion, the Bune War, was officially underway. The armada that cleared the Korean coast on November 2nd consisted of roughly 900 ships, transporting a combined force between 30 and 40,000 men. They struck the stepping stone islands of Tsushima and Iki first. Despite valiant and desperate defensive actions by the local samurai, the Mongols handily routed the defenders, clearing a direct runway to the mainland. With the outer islands compromised, the shogunate scrambled to block the Mongolian landing at Hakata Bay on Kyushu. But on November 19th, the Mongol fleet forced landfall across multiple beachheads, initiating the Battle of Bunei. The samurai mounted another fierce defense, but were fundamentally unprepared for the first introduction of gunpowder warfare to the Japanese archipelago. Exploding shells deafened horses, sowing chaos among warriors accustomed to highly organized ritual melees. Yet this offensive, too, ran into a relentless Japanese resistance. With supply lines dangerously extended across the newly occupied islands, and facing a defense that refused to collapse, the Mongol commanders made a conservative pivot. They retreated to the safety of their ships for a regroup. It would prove to be devastating. It seemed the gods were on the side of the defenders. As the Mongols regrouped in Hakata Bay, a violent late autumn storm rolled in, ravaging the fleet, destroying many of the ships. Up to a third of the armada was destroyed or severely damaged, costing the lives of roughly 13,000 men and forcing the survivors to limp back to the mainland. Kublai Khan had no intention of letting this setback dictate his borders. In the years following the retreat, he sent more emissaries to demand submission. By this time, a deeply emboldened shogunate didn't just ignore the messengers, they arrested and publicly beheaded them. The message back to the Yuan court was clear: Japan wasn't going down without a fight. The Mongols would have loved to retaliate immediately, but their military logistics were locked in a campaign to finish off the southern Song dynasty in China, forcing the invasion to the back burner until the mainland was secured. This allowed Japan to mobilize a massive infrastructure project along the coast of Kyushu, constructing miles of thick stone walls along the beaches of Hakata Bay. If the Mongols returned, they would be forced through a fortified bottleneck. And return they would. After dismantling the southern Song in 1279, Kublai Khan turned his attention east once more. This time, it was personal. He assembled one of the largest naval armadas in human history, a combined force of 4,400 ships carrying over 140,000 men. The Koan campaign, as it became known, began much like the first, with the Mongols taking the islands of Tsushima and Iki. But when they reached the mainland at Kyushu, they ran directly into the Borui, the massive defensive walls the Japanese had just spent years constructing. The fortifications worked flawlessly, denying the Mongols a beachhead. Under the cover of darkness, the Japanese even went on the offensive, sending small boats to slip into the fleet, assassinate commanders, and set Mongol ships ablaze, triggering a grueling 50-day tactical stalemate. Unable to breach the coast, the initial Mongol invasion fleet pulled back and waited for reinforcements. By August 12th, the massive southern fleet joined them, giving the Mongols an overwhelming numerical advantage over the roughly 40,000 samurai defenders. With clear summer weather and staggering numbers, a total Mongol rout seemed inevitable. But the defenders fought ferociously, and severe Mongol supply issues again kept the offensive from executing the swift victory they had predicted. Then came the true miscalculation. To avoid the notoriously bad late autumn weather that plagued their first attempt, the Mongol fleet departed in early summer of 1281, but the prolonged skirmishes pushed the battles into the late storm season, and on August 15th, a massive typhoon, far larger than the 1274 storm, descended directly upon the tightly packed armada in the Tsushima Strait. The catastrophic storm violently smashed the flat-bottom invasion ships against each other and the rocky coastline. It was an absolute slaughter. Over the next 2 days, thousands of ships were reduced to splinters. Of the 140,000 men, modern estimates suggest that up to 80% died. Tens of thousands drowned in the bay, and the few survivors who managed to wash up ashore were methodically hunted down by the samurai. Only a tiny fraction of the broken fleet limped back to mainland Asia, and Kublai Khan would never attempt to invade Japan again. The ecstatic Japanese credited their survival to the heavens, naming the storms the divine winds, or Kamikaze. It was a concept that saved the nation from the brink of total conquest, forging a deep cultural belief in divine protection that would remain anchored in the Japanese psyche to this day. Enjoying so far? Give us a like and subscribe. It helps more than you know and keeps this kind of content coming. While Kublai Khan contemplated a third invasion, his exhausted military logistics had reached a breaking point. Facing widespread mutinies among his troops and overextended supply lines, the Great Khan was forced to abandon his Japanese ambitions and focus internally on the newly captured provinces of the southern Song. The Japanese archipelago would remain safe from the Mongols. Yet this geopolitical safety did not cure the shogunate's paranoia. Convinced that a third armada could appear at any moment, Kamakura maintained a hyper-vigilant coastal watch. For decades, thousands of samurai remained permanently stationed along the Kyushu beaches, away from their homes to man the landings of Hakata Bay. Despite providing political continuity, this triggered a fatal opposition with the mechanics of Japanese feudalism. In a feudal society, the entire system relies on a social contract, in which warriors pledge their swords to the state in exchange for lands, titles, and looted wealth. But because this had been a purely defensive war, the shogunate was left with no new lands or spoils to distribute. The Hojo regents simply couldn't pay the bills of a warrior class that had spent years accumulating massive debts to fund their own armor, weapons, and provisions. The result was a deeply disgruntled, economically ruined samurai class. Sensing this fatal fracture in the shogunate's authority, Emperor Go-Daigo carped the diem and launched a rebellion that culminated in the total overthrow of the Hojo-backed Kamakura government in 1333. But this brief return to imperial rule, known as the Kemmu Restoration, proved highly volatile. Within just 3 years, the warrior class revolted again. By 1336, the Ashikaga clan seized the reins of the state, establishing a new shogunate and cementing a militarized government structure that would rule Japan for the next 2 centuries. The failed Mongol attempts to conquer Japan only reinforced what had been exposed in the Levant during the 1260s. The Mongols could bleed. More importantly, they were not nearly as intimidating when geographical conditions weren't perfectly in their favor. While the Battle of Ain Jalut saw a much smaller than intended army, historians argue that the Mongol advantage was blunted because lacking steppe pasture lands severely limited their horse-reliant mobility. Deep water posed the identical wall. While the storm may have delivered the final blow, the Japanese proved remarkably well prepared to contain the massive forces the Hans threw at them. While the previous section in this video detailed the financial fallout for the Japanese, things were arguably worse for the Mongols. Kublai Khan spent astronomical sums funding these failed takeovers. If the Japanese were left without spoils, the Mongols were left with something far worse: tens of thousands of dead soldiers, a dissolved armada, and an empty treasury. To cover the shortfalls, the Yuan court turned to hyperinflationary money printing and aggressive taxation over the following decades. These desperate economic policies deeply infuriated the Han peasantry, sowing the seeds for the Red Turban Rebellion that would ultimately shatter the Yuan dynasty and give rise to the Ming dynasty in 1368. Back across the water, the terrifying style of continental warfare fundamentally hardened the Japanese military. The highly mobile, non-traditional adversary that utilized mass formations and explosive weaponry forced the samurai to upgrade. To survive the exceptional defenses of continental armor, Japanese swordsmiths completely redesigned their blades, making them shorter, sturdier, and optimized for a much faster draw. They sharpened these curved edges to an almost inhuman extent, ultimately creating the katana, one of history's most iconic weapons. Yet while Japanese weapons were upgraded, it was their psyche that was truly elevated. Surviving the global scourge through what they perceived as godly intervention sent shockwaves of exceptionalism and divine nationalism across the islands. Though political fractures would continue to plague the nation, a united sense of national identity was forged at Hakata Bay. The myth of the Kamikaze became an unshakable psychological baseline, one that survived centuries of shifting shogunates and imperial rule. It was a conviction so deeply embedded that nearly 700 years later, the Tokotai suicide pilots of World War II would willingly adopt the moniker Kamikaze, mounting their cockpits in a desperate final attempt to recreate the very winds that had once saved their ancestors from the brink of total destruction. I hope you enjoyed this video and found this period in history both informative and enlightening. Please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below, and I hope you can join us for another video. Thanks for watching.